In 1940, the German military erased the French border and took Paris in 46 days. In 1945, the Red Army liquidated the Third Reich and crushed Berlin in 16 days. These were maneuvers that collapsed empires in less time than a summer vacation. But today, we see something different coming from the second best army in the world. They spent a decade to try to take Andivka. What's incredible is that they lost more people than what the population of that village was before the war. Now, keep in mind, Andivka is not Paris. It's a 28 square kilometer, 11 square mile graveyard of concrete that most Russians would never be able to find on a map. But a superpower's grand ambitions were strangled by the distance between two streetlights. Russia was blitzing forward at 15 to 70 meters, 49 to 230 feet per day. That's the length of a single city block. And at that pace, it took a nuclear power 1 year to cross a small town. In 1945, you could hide a division in a forest, but in 2026, the forest has thousands of eyes and a thermal pulse. The fog of war has been replaced by 24/7 digital vision. It's recorded every heartbeat, and every engine starts in real time. And the sky has become sentient of the mesh, the $500 plastic predators. And every assault is broadcast in a 4K to a pilot that's hundreds of miles away. Survival is no longer about bravery or about training. It's a matter of being able to outrun a radio signal. You can charge ahead if you want, but you will not be able to beat out the drone. The maps look frozen, but the human cost is hemorrhaging in silence. Total Russian casualties so far in this war have exceeded 1,240,000 people. In World War II, the Red Army covered 3,000 kilometers, 1,800 miles, to take Berlin. They did this in 1,418 days. In the same year, 1,418 days of this operation, they managed just 80 kilometers or 50 miles. They managed to crawl only as far as Pokrovsk. This wasn't a war maneuver. This is a mechanical failure of their entire civilization. The sky has become digital ceiling that executed anything with a heartbeat. And for the Russian soldiers, drones are not just part of the visible nightmare that they live in. They might have survived the grenades falling from the air, but they would not have survived the arithmetic waiting for them at home. Today, we see that this is just the beginning of the nightmares that the Russians face. My name is Dr. Jason Smart. I'm a special correspondent for the Kiev Post and National Security Advisor. The situation for the Russians is complex, to say the very least, but where it's the most complex is on the battlefield, where Russia, despite losing so many soldiers, wasting so much of their nation's wealth, has nothing to show for it. But let's dig into that, what's happening, and why it is quickly changing what we're seeing in the news. If you don't already, subscribe now. Consider becoming a channel member. Get insider information about what's really happening in Ukraine, in Russia, and with the autocracies with whom Russia aligns. So we have to understand that what we see today is that Russia is paying incredible sums of money to find anyone to join the military. In fact, signing bonuses have exceeded 3 times what typically somebody would make in their lifetime in rural areas. This is creating a blood money economy where the front is only there as part of a social ladder. But once the cash is spent, the village is left with nothing. It's left with one less man, and there is nothing more of him nor assistance from the state. The Kremlin is buying centimeters or inches of dirt in order to get centuries of debt. It is spending more now for this war than it is spending on anything else inside of Russia. Russia today has entered into terminal stagnation. It is creating its own in 1917 moment in slow motion. Remember back in World War I, it wasn't a total defeat that killed the Tsars. It was the sheer pointlessness of the casualty list. By February 2026, we see the Z Patriots were realizing that the map doesn't really work out for them, that somehow they're not expanding into Ukraine. But when we look back at history just a little bit further, remember what we saw with Prigozhin. Yevgeny Prigozhin, who was the head of the Wagner Group, he was a symptom of something larger. He was not the disease. The disease was a high command that treats 1,000 deaths a day as simply a rounding error. And when the elite sons stay in Dubai and the worker sons come home in bags, the social contract quickly evaporates. Stability wasn't found in a captured village, but it can be lost in a graveyard. Today, the hardware of this is what we call the Praetorian paradox. The Kremlin kept its best gear in Moscow to protect the regime from its own people, but they sent the meat to the front with cardboard armor and 60-year-old guns. This created a lethal resentment in the ranks that cannot be quashed. Today, we see that the soldiers are not happy how quickly they're dying out. How many of the soldiers do come that don't realize they're going to a war? They sign up thinking that they're getting jobs to go work in some rural area in a factory or to go work as a security guard in a mall, but then they find out they're going to the front lines. But when soldiers realize that, when soldiers realize they're being spent like cheap ammunition, the vertical of power in which they exist begins to crack. We saw the blueprint of this, though, back when we had Prigozhin and his uprising. That you remember, Prigozhin, back in 2023, decided to lead a march towards Moscow. And in that uprising, it was quite an interesting time. Because not only did he make it quite a distance, not only did the Russian military not confront him, nor did the Russian police, nor did the Russian border guards, nor did the Russian National Guard, nor did the Chechens. In fact, nobody confronted him. They were all scared of him. But there's something else. The Russian people, they greeted him. They treated him like a hero. So it probably gives you a good indication of how people really feel about the situation inside of Russia, and they really feel about Vladimir Putin. But there's something else that's very important about this moment. The people in Russia understand those who are going off to the war, they don't elicit a great deal of sympathy. They're not treated as heroes. They're treated as people who are being used or people who want to make cash fast. When you look at all the signs around Russia, they have large billboards everywhere announcing that you can make several years of what a teacher or a doctor can make if you just sign the dotted line and join up for military service. But joining up for military service is not a very good deal. Meters per day is the most that they ever gain. And meters per day is not going to change anything. You're not going to take Kiev. You're going to take the suburbs of a village somewhere in eastern Ukraine. But meters per day, it sounds good to Moscow. They argue we are making progress. Things are going ahead. And to some extent, they are correct. They are making progress, but at the rate of meters per day. Which reminds me, please check out the first pinned comment below with the question of the day and with a really great video you should check out. But right below that, you'll see how you too can help the Ukrainian soldiers get the supplies they need to survive this cold winter and help Ukraine defeat Russia. Thank you. But either way, for Russia, this is not a good system because they cannot afford it. Russia probably would be willing to do this eternally, but at some point, you have to pay for things. And when you don't have money, financing a war becomes ever more complicated. Today, the Russian economy is cannibalizing itself. In fact, today we see that interest rates, they've been frozen, and they're down from the 21% they were not too long ago. But the Russian economy itself, according to the central bank, is already overheating. Russia is preparing for things to get worse in their economy. They understand that the oil prices are declining, that they're about to get even worse. But more than that, they're already facing this year a $60 billion hole in their budget. The Kremlin has claimed that it is able to reawaken its economy, that it doesn't need the global forces to be on its side. But the fact is, they do need the global forces. The Russians today are doing things that nobody can really understand. You look at them pulling out their T-62s, the tanks, and you realize how desperate the Russian military is. That today they have lost 11,625 tanks since the beginning of the war. That was 143% of their total active fleet when the war began. Russia has lost 2,400 armored vehicles every year, but they only produce 900 new ones every year. This is creating a permanent structural deficit, 1,500 vehicles annually. And before this, just look at the T-90s. Look at the stock of these tanks. Today, it's essentially zero. But beyond this, there's bigger problems for Russia, because Russia today is liquidating itself. Getting more tanks is something that Russia will eventually do, but that assumes that there will still be a Russia. But how about if Russia might not be? Today, Russia is liquidating its own genetic future. By 2026, the Russian birth rate has collapsed to just 1.3. And that's far below the 2.1 needed to survive as a people. Today, we see that the people are dying out in Russia. Quite literally, in some regions, the working age male population has shrunk by 15%. You cannot build a modern economy without young and healthy men. Russia today is becoming truly like a 19th century border village. This vassalization of Russia is the final nail in the regime's coffin. Russia today might be able to gain meters inside of Ukraine, but what does it gain for its future? How will it continue to fight? And the answer is simple: it cannot. And that's part of the reason the war might actually continue. Vladimir Putin believes that he's the savior of Russia. He cannot accept that he's not. He would never admit, of course, that perhaps he was mistaken to begin his 3-day special military operation against Ukraine. He'll never say that. But perhaps he does, somewhere in his heart, somewhere in his mind, realize that Russia might not be on the right path. That today, that lack of young men will have generational consequences for his country. It is not something they'll bounce back from. But that means that you think that Vladimir Putin cares about Russia. I, for one, do not agree with that statement. I see no evidence in any action he's ever taken that Vladimir Putin cares, one way or the other, about either Russia or the Russian people. For him, this is just a means to an end. This is a means for him to consolidate wealth, for him to have power. Keep in mind, Vladimir Putin served for many years in the government in the Soviet Union and the KGB. But after that, once he started serving in the mayor's office in St. Petersburg with Anatoly Sobchak, who was known to be a major reformer, he was known himself, Putin, to be a major bribe taker. This is right after the collapse of the Soviet Union. He wasted no time after Russia got its limited period as a democracy before he became engaged immediately in corruption. He didn't try to usher in a new era of democracy or of capitalism or of freedom. He was worried about how to make a buck. And that's what he's done for the past 25 years. It has always been about Vladimir Putin, his own financial interest. What Vladimir Putin does is rarely going to be in the interest of anyone else because he's got a one-track mind. How can he maintain power? Dictatorships fall quite often. It happens all the time. And that's why you have to be careful. You have to make sure that you don't have anyone challenge you. What a convenient reason to not end a war. You've got there tens of thousands of young men. Those young men are pretty angry at this point. Many of them have just gotten out of prison and sent to the front. So Vladimir Putin, how does he feel about this? Do you think he would like to see these people return to Moscow, to be mixing with the general population, to become available, to be contracted by those who might wish to openly turn against his regime? That's the least thing that Vladimir Putin wants. Putin today is quite happy, quite satisfied that there are men far away who are not a problem for him. But more than that, if you look at the incredible, cynical nature of Russia, there are plenty of people making money from this war. Putin's family is among them. And as a result, there is actually a financial motive to keep the show on the road, to keep this war going. Because if this war were to end, what does that gain them? How does that benefit them? Be absolutely certain what happens to the Russian soldiers, what happens to the Russian army, is not the concern of Vladimir Putin. If it was, he wouldn't have them inside of Ukraine right now fighting and dying for meters of land. Check out this video. You'll like it. Thank you for supporting Ukraine.